Hi guys, my name is Arya and I welcome you all to this CSS tutorial. In this tutorial, we'll be covering from the basics of CSS to some advanced CSS which includes animation. Okay, so before we actually start with coding our own bit of CSS, let's go through some of the basics. So what exactly is CSS? Well, CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets and is generally used to control how HTML tags and elements are displayed on your screen. So this means basic styling of your web page is controlled by CSS. Now, CSS was actually made to solve problems that were introduced in HTML 3.2. Now, HTML 3.2 got in some new attributes like font color, background color, which generally was pertaining to styling of an element on a web page. Now, while this did add some very needed functionality into HTML 3.2, it cluttered up your code as a developer and made your life pretty miserable. So to keep the structure of your web page, which is the HTML, and to make the styling a different aspect, CSS was made by W3C. So W3C stands for the World Wide Web Consortium, and CSS till date is still being maintained by the W3C developers. Okay, so that was a general introduction to CSS. Now let's move ahead. So this is the basic syntax of CSS. You basically have selectors, which selects or targets the place that you want to attach your styling to. Then you have basic properties and value pairs. Now you can include your CSS into your HTML with a link tag while putting the href attribute as the file name. Or you can do some inline CSS, but that's not actually recommended because that's the problem that we are actually trying to mitigate by putting CSS as a different file. Also, if you don't want to create another CSS file, you can do some internal CSS by putting in some style tags in your head tag and just writing some normal CSS to it. Okay, so now let's see the different type of CSS selectors. So these are all the different type of CSS selectors, and basically a selector is a way of targeting an element on a web page. So the star selector selects all the elements and applies the CSS that you would apply to it. And then if you would say div, then it would apply your CSS to all the divs. Now div comma p will apply to all the divs and paragraphs. Div space p will put your styling to all the paragraphs inside divs. Now going through all the CSS selectors is a pretty cumbersome job, so I recommend that you go through this page on W3 Schools, which has all the different types of selectors and the different types of pseudo selectors all listed out. So this will very much help you when you're doing your own CSS, so always keep this page open. Now just for basic sake, let me just tell you about pseudo selectors. So we also have pseudo selectors, which is defined something like this. So pseudo selectors include stuff like hover, active, visited, and stuff like that. Now suppose you were hovering over an A tag, so you can say there is supposed to be some specific styling when you're hovering over it. So how would you do that? You would just say A:hover and then you would actually specify the styling that you want. Now you could also find all these types of pseudo selectors out here, and it's all listed out here. So A visited, like select all visited links, something like that. Now I also want to make you all aware of the box model that is very much used in CSS. Now box model has four things: the content, padding, border, and margin. So content is the basic content of the web page that you want to show to your general audience. Then the padding is the space between your border and the content itself. The border is a line that can be of any size, color, and width. And then there's a margin, which is the distance from the edge of the screen to the border. Okay. And now the box model looks something like this. So the content comes in between, then comes the padding, which is between the border and the content, and then there's the margin, which is between the screen and the border itself, the screen edge and the border, right? So that's how the box model works. Now the last bit of basics is the CSS units. So there are four kinds of units. Firstly, we have the pixel. So pixel represents any pixel on a device. So you could say something like font size is equals to 25 pixels, so it'll make it actually 25 pixels. Then there's also points, which is mostly used in print media. And all you need to remember to use points correctly, that 72 points equals 1 inch. Now the last two types of units are relative units. Now these are relative to your current font size. So 1 em or 100% is actually equals to your current font size. So if you want something to be double your font size, all you have to say is 2 em. So these are how relative units work in CSS. Okay, so that was all the basics of CSS and how you select stuff and all the units. Now let's get ahead and code some of our own CSS. So for this time, I've actually created a bunch of HTML pages, and we're going to style these HTML pages by adding some CSS into them, and this will stand as good practice for CSS alone. Okay, so for the first page, we have this page called page1.html. And it's a pretty basic page. Let me just open it up and show it to you guys. So this is what it looks like without any sort of CSS being attached to it. Now we're going to create some CSS and we're going to try and practice, first of all, selecting stuff in different ways possible. Okay, so firstly, let's do some very random CSS. Okay, firstly, let's target all the divs in this HTML. So how would you actually do that? Well, you'd say div by going selectors, and let's actually save this as a CSS file first so that our syntax is colored properly. Okay, so that's a div. So that's how you select any element in CSS. Now suppose we were to say background color, or rather just background, it'll be purple. And the text or the color of the text will be white. So now everything inside a div will look like that. So now let's just save this as page 1. As it's saved as page1.css, let's reload our page. And everything that is inside the div now has a white text and it also has a purple background. Okay, now let's see how we actually select IDs. So we select IDs with the hash. So we have an ID called quote out here if you go and see. So where is that thing gone? Okay, so this paragraph out here that you see has the ID called quote. So we're going to select that and put in some of our own CSS. So let's see. Now that we've selected our ID, we can say, suppose we want to change the font family. So we could say font family is Verdana, and you could also put in alternate font families just in case Verdana doesn't exist in your system, like Gill Sans. Fine. So that's how you set up your font family. Let's also set the color to be black. Let's see what changes now. So this is the code that I was talking about. So that font should change now. Let's reload. Oh yes, now the font has become Verdana, and that's what we exactly wanted. And the text is also black now. Okay, so how do we select classes now? So if you go here and see, we should have a class called movies. Right. So all these have a class called movie, all these A tags. So let's select them. First of all, to select a class, you say dot and then you say the class name. Now we could put in some random CSS into this again. So let's make the color, let's keep it white, and let's make the background steel blue. Let's see. So where are our movies? Let's see where the movies actually exist. Oh yeah, Dota, Splinter Cell, and God of War. These are the movies, so these should now change. Let's save it. And now they have a background color of steel blue and they have a text color of white. And that's exactly what we defined out here. Fine. Now let's try out some other kinds of selectors. So suppose in the span out here, we have this ID called author. So what if we only want to target that? What would we say? So we could say span and hashtag author. Now you could put any type of CSS. So let's say text transform. So this is how you transform any sort of text, and you could say uppercase. Now the author will be changed to uppercase out here, and this is the author, the Pope Alexander part. Now watch that. Now it's just uppercase, and we have selected it with this selector called span and hashtag author. We can also do some other kinds of selecting. Let me just show it to you. So we could select the LIs of the unordered list or the ordered list. So our skills is the ID. This is the ID of skills. So let's select them now. So we have skills and we could go the ordered list and then the LI. And what we want to say out here is the color will be purple. We can do the same thing for the unordered list too. Let me just copy that down. Put this here. Say unordered list. And let's say we change the text color to white. Save that. Let's reload our page. So wait, first of all, let me uncomment this. Now let's save it again, reload our page and see the differences. Now since we had given it a purple color, it's now all purple, and let me just put a background of white so that you can see it. Yeah, now these are purple and these are background white. We can do the same for the unordered list too. Let me just uncomment that. Let me also give it a background of purple. Or actually, let it be like that. Let's just make it blue. Now Sass and Hamel have turned into blue as you see out here. This is the blue thing. Fine. Now that was selectors. Okay, now let's go ahead and select some other stuff. So what if we want to select all the paragraphs that are after the h3 tag? So if you remember, we can do that by saying h3 plus p, and let's say we want a background of black and some text color that is white. So color white. Not being very creative with my CSS at this moment because this is just about selecting. So let's see how that reloads. Yep, now we have a color of white and a background of black. And that only selected the paragraph just after the h3, which is my favorite video games. Okay, we can also select every paragraph that has a class by just saying something like p and class. We don't even need to specify the color, or I mean the class name. So you go background, let's say we want to give a gray background. Let's see all the paragraphs of the class. So this is the only paragraph with the class. Now you can do the same thing for IDs, just say ID out here, and let's see all the paragraphs with an ID. So this is the only paragraph with an ID. Okay, so now that we're done with selecting stuff, let's go and actually see how text can be transformed with the use of CSS. Fine. So first of all, I already have a page created for that. So this is going to be our page that we are going to use to see how text is transformed. If you see, I have an ordered list with all the types of text transformations or the text stylings that I want to show. And we also have a paragraph out here which will show the basics box elements like the borders, margins, and padding. So I'm going to demonstrate that through this PID out here. Right, so let's get started. First of all, let's create our CSS file, and in the CSS file we're going to save it and we're going to call it page2.css. Right. Then yeah, it's connected as page 2. So let's get started. So first of all, let's target this ID with lorem. So lorem ipsum is just some Latin paragraph that is normally used in web development to fill in spaces with text, where you can always come back and delete that text and fill it with something more meaningful. So for now, we are going to be using this lorem ipsum thing. So it's in a paragraph tag with an ID of lorem. So let's go ahead and select it. So we're going to select it with the help of the ID. Call it lorem. Now, first of all, let me just show you what the page looks like without any CSS attached to it. So this is what the page looks like, right? So this is the part that we are going to target right now. First of all, let's give it a background of black. Let's make the color of the text white. Let me show you what that looks like. Okay, right? Now let's give it some borders and padding. So first of all, to give a border, we could say we use the border property, then we give 3 parameters: the type of the border, the size of the border, and then the color. And you do it something like this: 3px solid red. Now apart from solid, there are a lot of types of borders, and those include dashed, dotted, rigged, and many more. These are the ones that are just from the top of my head. So you can try them out, and you can find other types of CSS border just by going to Google and saying CSS border types. So these are all the types of borders that you get, and you can definitely check them out. It's impossible to show everything in one video like that, so let me just show you the solid type. So let's save it and let's see what kind of border we actually get. Let's close this down. Yeah, now we have this neat little border of 3 pixels in size and red in color. Now let me just show you how dotted would look like. So this is what dotted looks like, and this is what dashed looks like. Fine. And this is what dashed is. Okay. Now let's also give this thing some padding. Now padding exists between the content and the border. So I just explained the box model when we were discussing the basics of CSS, so I hope you remember that. So for padding, there are 4 parameters actually: the right, top, left, and bottom. So you can define your padding something like this. You could go 13 pixels, 13 pixels, 13 pixels, and 20 pixels. Now these are just very arbitrary numbers, but what I want to explain is that this first part will mean that there's 13 pixels of padding from the top, and then we move in a clockwise fashion. So this is on the right, this is in the bottom, so 13 pixels of padding in the bottom and 20 pixels of padding on the left. Now you could also say this really easily if you want to give equal amounts of padding, suppose. Now this means that there will be 13 pixels of padding on the top and bottom, and this second part would mean that there's 13 pixels of padding on the left and the right. And if you just put 1 digit, that means there's 13 pixels of padding all around it. Now let's go and put these different paddings around lorem ipsum. Now it looks much neater. We can also put a margin. So let's put a margin, and the margin also works in the same way. So suppose you were to say 5 pixels, that means it would give a 5 pixel margin all around your content. If you were to put, say, 10 pixels and 20 pixels, this means that 10 pixels of margin on the top and bottom and 20 pixels of margin on the left and right. And there's also another keyword that I want to make you aware of, and that is auto. So what auto does is it gives equal amounts of margin however you specify it. So out here it'll give 10 pixels of margin on the top and bottom and equal amounts of margin on the left and right. So let's see how that works. Yep, so that's how it changed it. Now that was all about the box modeling. So let me just remove this part from the HTML, and let's remove this part from the CSS. Now as you guys can see, I have this ordered list out here. First of all, let me reload the page. Now I have this ordered list out here which shows us all the types of styles and weights and sizes that I'm going to be showing right now, and this will include a lot of the units that we discussed, like ems, points, pixels and percentages. So let's move ahead. So to select these, I'll be using these IDs. So let me just remember the first 4 IDs is normal, italic, oblique and small cap. So let's go ahead and create them. So firstly, let's select our normal ID and say what are we going to try and show here is font style. So all you have to say is font style is normal. So normal basically means that the font style will be normal instead of something bolded. Then I think we had italic, so you go font style italic. Then we also had oblique, so we go font style oblique, and we also had small caps. So let me just see that again. Yep, it's small cap. So you go small cap, and what are we trying to show in small cap is the font variant. So font variant small caps. So let me just reload and see how that changed stuff. Okay, so font style normal just stays normal, while italic and oblique are almost similar. Then in font variant small caps, this is how it would look like, where the first letter has a bigger font size and the rest have a smaller font size, but everything is in capital. And next is the font weight. So let's see the IDs. It's normal, bold, bolder. So let's go with that now. So firstly we have normal. So font size is the size, or weight, it's weight. So font weight will be normal. Next part is bold, bolder, lighter. Okay, so we select bolder like that. We go font weight is bolder, and we can say again, what's after bolder? It's bold. Okay, so W bold, and you go font weight is bold. Let's see how that changes stuff. So yeah, bold is bold, and font weight bolder is slightly more bolder, while font weight normal is absolutely normal. Right, time for some more. So the next is the font size, which goes from extra large, large, medium, small, extra, extra small. So let's do that. So first is extra, extra large, and this is the font size that we're talking about. So it's extra, extra large. There's also extra large. So extra, extra large looks something like this, while only extra large looks something like this. Fine. Then we also have large. So font size will be large. So that's font size large. Next we have medium, small and extra, extra small. So medium, small and extra, extra small. So this is going to be font size medium, this is going to be font size small, and this is going to be font size extra, extra small. So let's see how that changes stuff. So this is extra, extra small, this is small, and this is medium. Now the next thing that we're going to see is how points work. So our size is going to be 25 points. So instead of just doing that, let me just change extra, extra small. And let's say it's 25 points. You should remember that 1 point is around 2 inches. So that's how font size extra, extra small would look like if it was 25 points. Then we could also say the font size is 150%. So that shows us how percentages works, where 100% means the current font size. Look at the change, and that's how 150% means. The next thing that we want to show is line height. So let's say, what is the ID? Let me just check the ID. So the line height IDs are line normal, height 25 points. So let's just select one, line normal, and this is going to have a line height of normal. Let's put a semicolon, save it up, and that's how line height normal is. That is the normal line height. Now you could say your line height is 25 points, and that's how it would change. Also, you could say your line height is around 25 EM or just 5 EM, let's say that. And that's how it would change even more with EM, with 1 EM being the constant font size that we are using. Or you could say line height is 200%. That is basically twice of what our line height or font is. So that's how it would change, right? So that was all about text styling. Now let's move ahead and see how positioning and stuff takes place in CSS. So for positioning, I have again gone ahead and created this page3.html. So in here we will be including a CSS page called page3.css. So let's go ahead and create that. First of all, we have to set this to CSS, save it as page3. And let's get started. So first of all, we have three types of positioning in CSS: absolute, fixed, and relative. So first of all, I'm going to show absolute positioning to you guys. Now before I show absolute positioning, let me just show you guys how text and stuff can be centered first of all. So let's start doing some random CSS. So first of all, we are going to target this ID called container. So let's go hashtag container. And let's go to background, some random color. So for color picker, we just go color picker. Let's give us this background. Go OK. That's the background we chose. Let's also give it some borders. Border will be 2 pixels, solid and black. We can also set up a border radius. So border radius gives you a curved border. So you could say border radius is around 5 pixels, let's say. Now let me just open up the HTML file that is concerned at this moment. So this is page 3. Okay, so this is with some CSS. Now let me just uncomment that CSS first. So this is what our page would look like without any sort of CSS. Now this is what it looks like with the CSS that we just included. Now to make you aware of how box radius works, let me just uncomment that first. Let's comment it out. So box radius should not work, and we should get, yeah, now if you see, let's zoom in out here. You see that this border is pointed. Suppose we don't want that to happen. Let's remove that first, and let's uncomment this, save it, let's reload, and now we have this slight little curved border which looks much neater. Okay, now we can also center stuff. So a neat way to do that is, let me just show it to you. Let's take this part called centered. Now to center it, let me just give it a first background to make it look different. So this background will be, let's say, 89 CFF0. So that's our color. Let's see what our color looks like. So that is the color that we are gonna center. Now let's say our width is gonna be, we can set the width of elements like this. So you say width is 50%. And then you go margin is going to be auto. So what does auto do? It'll put an equal margin on all sides. Let's reload our page. Yep, and now it's centered. We can also center without actually centering the element. We can just center the text by just saying text, align, and center. Fine. Now that will remove the background and just keep the text out here. So that's exactly what we wanted, and that's how you align your text. Okay, now let's move ahead with absolute positioning. Now, absolute positioning means positioning based on the document itself, which means this whole web browser. So a browser is basically the document that you are actually manipulating. So it's called document object manipulation, if you've heard of that term. So let's go ahead and let me just show you how absolute positioning works. So first of all, we have this element called top left, and we're going to try and put it on the top left. So let's select that first. So you go top left. Now let's give it a background. Okay, that'll going to be the background. Let's also give it a border. So let the border be 1 pixel, solid and black. Let's say now to position something with absolute positioning, all you have to say is position is absolute. Now let's also keep the width around 200 pixels and the height also around 200 pixels. Let's save it. Let's see how stuff changes. Let me just zoom out. Yeah, so that is our element. So this is what top left and bottom right is going to look like. Now we are going to try and select this element and put it in the bottom right of this parent. So let me just show you how that is done. So to select that, I've already created an ID for it and it's called bottom right. Let me give it a background of white, and you say the position is absolute. Now we want to change the position to actually inside the element. So we have to say it's going to be 0 pixels from the bottom and also 0 pixels from the right. So since has absolute positioning, it's going to position this inside of this. So first of all, let's give it a background of white and also make the color black. Right. And now we have this right where we want it. Now there's also something called the Z index. So Z index is what comes first on your screen basically. So if you have multiple things that are stacked on top of each other with absolute positioning, the one with the most Z index will be the one that is shown on top. So you could set a Z index like this and say the Z index is 5. So anything with a Z index of 4 will actually come underneath this thing, right? So that was all about absolute positioning. Now let's go ahead and do some fixed positioning. So for fixed positioning, we have this ID called fixed, which contains a paragraph saying I'm staying right here. So let's select that first. Let me just remove all this stuff so that it's not cluttered anymore. Let me reload the page, save it, reload it, and that's all. So I'm staying here. First of all, this is what is going to change. Fixed positioning, right? Is that what we called it? Fixed position, okay. Now first of all you have to say is position is going to be fixed. Now let's make it more prominent by giving it a background of black and a text color of white. So let's see, this has become black and position is fixed. Whatever I do, if I'm scrolling, it just stays there. It doesn't really matter what I do to this thing. Okay, so that was all about fixed positioning. Now the next thing that we're going to see is relative positioning. So for that I already have 2 elements created. So let's say these are the divs, which says this is going to be relative. So relative positioning, as I was just saying, is positioning based on the relative position of the element. So let me just show you. So relative 1. Now let's give it a background first. So let's just select some color. Let's make this green out here. Okay, that's gonna be our color. Let's give it a border of 1 pixel solid black, and let's say the height is gonna be around 100 pixels. Now we're gonna select another element and position it relative to this element. Okay, so that is this element right out here is going to be relative to. So to set something with the position of relative, all we have to say that the position is relative, and the rest of the CSS is just arbitrary. So let's say left, not padding left. So you want to position it somewhere left of it, and the positioning is going to be relative. So 20 pixels from the original positions, 20 pixels to the left from the original position, I mean. And you could say from the top it would be around 30 pixels. You could also say negative 30 pixels to move it the other way around. Let's give it a background. I'm already given it the background. Okay, let's give it a background of yellow. So you say background equals yellow, and you could also give it a border and say 1px solid blue. Let's get a blue background. Okay, so this relative layout is going to be positioned relative to this thing. Fine, let's just reload and see. Yep, and that's how relative positioning works. Now this might just not look neat at this moment, but I'm trying to drive a point home. Fine. Okay, now let me just see if I have dog.jpg. Okay, there's a PNG file called Edureka. So let me just show you something cool. First of all, let me just remove everything from here. Okay, so now that our things are less cluttered, and let me just rename this now to the image that is already there. So edureka.png and edureka.png. Fine, let's save this. Let's see what our page looks like now. So this is what it looks like. Now you can float stuff like images to the left and right. So let's just select the image tag and suppose you say float them to the right. These will float everything to the right. Now that's how you position stuff or images with the float tag. So I guess that was all about positioning of stuff. Now let's move ahead. Okay, so in this part we are going to be learning about overflows. So for overflows, what we can do, let's go back to page2.html, and we have this text out here, or this unordered list, and this list is pretty big. Right. First of all, let's open up a new page, or rather let's open up, okay, wait. Let me just close these out. So let's save this as page2.css, or rather let's just call it something new. First of all, let's set this to CSS. Right. Let's save it and let's call it overflow. Now what I want to show you guys is something really cool. So let's select the ordered list. So that's what we're going to select. Let's say it has width of around 100 pixels. It has some padding from the top, right? So let's get some padding of 10 pixels and 10 pixels all around rather. Let's give it a margin of 100 pixels and auto, so I'll bring it right to the center. Let's see. So it was page 2 that we're fiddling around with. So this is page2.html. Now let me just replace this with overflow.css. Let's see now. Yeah, so this is what it looks like. Now, if you see, to scroll through this list is quite cumbersome because you have to actually scroll like this. Let's give it a background also. Background is going to be black, as I just love black, and the color of our font is going to be white. See how that changed? Yep, so this is what it looks like. Now what if you do and say max height is equals to 500, or rather only 200 pixels. Yeah, so that doesn't really do much. So if you say overflow is auto, you get a scrolling bar. Or you could say overflow is scroll. Let's remove this max height. Now you see we have these little scroll bars out here, and that's what exactly overflow does. It's basically shows us the items and you can scroll through them. Yeah, basically like that. So if you were to say that the width is only suppose 50 pixels, let's say, make this even smaller. Yeah, so that's how now you have this little scroll bar that lets you scroll through stuff. So that's how overflow works. Okay, now let's look at some pseudo selectors or some pseudo classes that we can select and style. So first of all, let me open up the page that is going to be responsible for that. So we have this page out here that I've created. Now it also has some new tags that you might be seeing. These are some HTML5 tags. So header tag, nav tags, and then the main tag. These are just some new tags that you see in HTML5, and you can also target them through CSS3. So targeting them is pretty easy, but what I want to show is something pretty cool. Let's save it first. Let's create a new page. Let's call it CSS. Right, so let's save this first as page5.css. Okay, so now it's time to practice some more CSS, and we'll be doing it on this page that I've created. So this page is kind of a big page, to be honest. It has quite a lot of paragraphs, quite a lot of links, a few images also, I guess. And they use a lot of the HTML5 tags that have been newly introduced, like the header tag, the nav ID, or the nav tag, the main tag. We have section tags, and a lot of other tags like these. Now these tags can also be selected with the help of, let's say, CSS3. That's what we are learning. Okay, now let me just remove this part because we won't be needing that. Now let's go ahead and save our content, and let me just show you what this actually looks like on the web page. So let's go ahead and open up page 5, and this is what it looks like on a web browser rather, without any CSS attached to it. So let's transform this thing with the help of some CSS. So firstly, we've created this page called page5.css, and we've already attached it to this page out here with the link tag and the href attribute. Now let's get started. So first of all, let me just actually make use of some pseudo selectors. So we have already discussed pseudo selectors while going over the basics. Now let me just show you how they work. So a hover is going to target all the a links while we are hovering over them. Now when we are hovering over them, we want the background to become black and text to become white. right? So let's save it, let's reload. Now if we hover over these, the background becomes black and the text becomes white. Right now, the same thing can be done with a lot of other selectors, like this is active. So when you click on a link, that means it's going to turn like that. So let's save it. Let's see. Let's reload our page first of all. Now you see when we hover, nothing happens, but once we click it, it becomes that black and white kind of thing. Right? We can also do this for visited, and that will actually change the link once it's been visited. So if we go and do this, open link in new tab. Well, it's not working out here, but if there was actually a database connected, you would actually see this to them. Now suppose we want to select our body. Let's give it a background first of all. Get out the color picker. Let's give it a nice green background. Okay, and that's going to be our background for the body. Now we also have a div with the ID of wrapper. So let's go ahead and select that first. So we say wrapper. Now let's give it some CSS. So we're going to say margin is going to be 0 and auto. Now whenever you say 0, you do not need to actually specify the units, so we can just do that. We'll give it a background color of white. Then we'll give it a width of around 800 pixels. We'll give it a height of around 1000 pixels. Okay, now let's save that and let's see what it looks like now. So this is what it has turned to. Now we can also do some more stuff. So let's select some HTML5 elements like the header tag, and let me just show you that CSS still works as we want it to. So let's give it some simple padding around 0 pixels on the top, 0 pixels on the right, and we want to give some 10 pixels on the bottom and 0 pixels on the left too. See what changes. Now we got that little change. We can also select stuff like with the IDs as I just showed you. Now let's select the navigation, which has the ID of horse nav. Let me just check if I'm right. Yep, it's called horse nav with the N being capital. Now we can say stuff like, so there's also the display attribute. This shows how elements will be displayed. Now they can be blocked or inline block, which means it'll be converted into an inline element. Now we could say display is blocked. And you could just give it some background just to make it more apparent. So let's give it a background color black and make the color white. Let's see. Yep, that's how it's selected. Now you can also give pseudo tags like this one out here, like visited, to IDs too. So let's say once we're hovering over the nav bar, we want this to happen. So let's save it. Now if we only hover over it, will the change happen? So that's how that works. Now let's go over and see some word spacing. Now word spacing is used for mostly specifying the words. So let me just remove some stuff from here. First of all, let's remove all this. Right, let's remove the header tags, and we just need this part where we have all these paragraphs. So I'll be targeting the first paragraph to show you all word spacing. So it's going to be this one out here, right here. Fine, let's save it. Go ahead here, reload the page. Now this is what it looks like. Let's remove everything that we have already created, and let's just select para 1. I hope that's what it was called out here. So it is called para 1 indeed. Now we can go word spacing and just say, let's give it 10 pixels between the words. Right, so the spacing between these words in this paragraph should change now. Now that we've saved it, let's go ahead and reload. So yeah, now you can see that the word spacing for this out here is much more different. Now we can also do letter spacing the same way. So let's select paragraph 2 for that. So for letter spacing, all we have to say is letter spacing, and then we could say something like 10 pixels. Now this will specify the letters and how they are spaced. Now you can see this horrible thing is having 10 pixels of letter spacing. It also put some word spacing into this, so let's see how that looks like. Let's put a word spacing of 20 pixels and make this even more ugly. Yep, so that's what it would look like with word spacing and letter spacing. So that was just for experimentation purposes, and you can use that whenever you feel free to. Okay, so another property that I want to make you all aware of that is in CSS is a clear property. So the clear property makes sure that nothing actually appears before it. So in this case, the footer tag, which is right about here, which says only the copyright part. Now it is shown here. This is the footer tag that we are talking about. So we want to say something like, let's say, so you can say clear and both. So that's how you specify clears. Okay, so let's give it a background color of black. Let's also say the color of the text will be white, just to make it a bit more prominent. Yeah, so nothing actually appears before that. So that's how you use clear now. So there's also style types, also list style types. So let me just see. We have these lists out here, first of all, which says random 1, 2, 3, random 1, 2, 3. Now, let's say, first of all, let's convert this into an unordered list. So find all, let's gonna replace that with unordered list. Right. I just want to show it with unordered list first. So let's say, let's select all the ULs and let's say list style is gonna be none. Now if you see out here, we have these bullet points and now we don't. Okay, so you can also do these with ordered lists. So let's go back and let's do control and UL, find all. Let's select them, let's make them OLs, ordered lists. Let's see. Now OL doesn't work with list type none, if you just realized. Now we can do something like alpha, lower alpha. So let's see that, how that works. Okay, so for lower alpha we have to say list style type. Please remember that, that was my mistake right now. Okay, if you have to select the OLs again. Now you see that we have these list types that is saying with small caps. Now there are other stuff like lower Latin, there's also lower Latin, so let me just show you what that looks like. Save it. Okay, that doesn't really change because I don't think I have Latin installed, but we can also go Greek. There's a bunch of stuff that you can do. It's pretty fun. So I have Greek installed. Now it goes alpha, beta, gamma instead of ABC. And that's how you can change stuff. You can also change the position of the list style. So list style position, you could say outside. So let's see what that means. And doesn't really change much out here, but that's one of the properties that I just wanted to show. Okay, now you can also place contents before an element. So let me just show you how to do that. Let's clear all of these things now. So let's say we want to select par1 and say, so this is going to be a pseudo selector again. So you say after, you say content, and your content is going to be, let's say, at the rate. Say all these at the rates are going to be before this little thing out here. So let me just show you the change. Yep, so since we said after, it has all these at rates after, but if we say before, this is how it'll change. So now it's all before them. Right. Okay, now let's go ahead and see how we can use the nth child elements. So for that, we're going to select our UL again. Actually, let me go ahead and delete everything first of all. Okay, so let me create another HTML boilerplate, and this is going to be called list. First of all, let's say we have an unordered list with a bunch of list items. So LIs all around. Let me just copy that down and paste it a few times. Right, so now we have all these list items here. Let's just fill them up with some random text. Okay, so let's just say something random like cats. So let's save this, let's go out here. Now we have these things called cats. Okay, so what if we want them to have alternate paragraphs? I mean alternate background colors. So first of all, let's go ahead and select the LIs and give them a background. Let's say this gray color that I have selected, F7, F7, F7. Now you see we have, okay, this doesn't seem to be working. LIs. Looks like I've deleted my link tag, that's why the CSS was not working. So let's see. Now we have that. Okay, so first of all, let's go back and change this to F7, 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 right? This will give it this gray color that you see out here. Let's also give it the width of around 360 pixels, so that'll bring it there. Let's also give it a margin of 100 pixels from the top and equal on the side. Let's bring it to the center. Right, now suppose you want to say li nth child, and you could say something like do n. So this will select all the even childs, and you could say they have a background color of white. So let's see how that changes things for us. Now you see that all these things out here have an alternating background color where it's gray, white, gray, white, gray, white, and that's how you select all the even childs. Now you can also select the first child by saying first child. For that we do not really need this to_n counter, and now only the first is black. You could also say last child, and now the last will be white. And that's how stuff changes with CSS. Okay, now you can also change the first line. So let's go ahead and change our HTML up a bit. So let's create a paragraph, and it's gonna have some lorem ipsum in it. So let me just show you something really cool. Let's delete all of this stuff. Let's select our paragraph, and we're going to say the pseudo selector called first line, and let's say text transform uppercase. So let's reload that. First of all, let me just comment this out just to show you what the page looks like without any CSS. So this is our page without any CSS, and let me uncomment this now, save it, and there you go. The first line has been completely made uppercase. Now instead of first line, you could also say last line, and that will transform the last line to uppercase. You could also say something like first letter. And okay, so just to show you that it does indeed work, let me just reload this without any CSS first. Okay, now you see that the lorem ipsum begins with a lowercase l. Now let me just uncomment this out, save it, and now you see that the first thing is a capital. You could also change it to say stuff like text size, or rather font size, and say around 100 pixels. Now the first letter will be 100 pixel big, and that's how you can do stuff like that. Okay, so another thing is you can also change the pointer or the cursor. So let's see, when you're hovering over a paragraph, let's say P and hover, first of all we want the background to become black, we also want the color to become white, and we want the cursor to become pointer. So let's see, so when you're hovering over it, it becomes this hand like thing, and when you go out it comes back to normal. So that's how you can change the cursor also. Now let me show you all something called the box shadow first of all. So let's remove this cursor part. So without the cursor it looks something like this. Let's remove the hover tag so that's always there. Right. Okay, now let's also change this to that gray color that I really like, and let's also change this to black. So this is what it looks like now. Let's give it a width of around 400 pixels. So this is what it looks like. Now let's also center it so that I can show you some cool stuff. So margin, let's say 0 and auto. So this is going to center it from the top of the screen. Now that it's centered, okay, so this is what our thing looks like. Now suppose we were to give it a border. So borders are really neat. So 2px solid black. So this is what a border looks like. But there are other stuff also, like a box shadow. So this is how box shadow works. Takes 3 parameters, so one is z, x and y axis, and not really in that order, it's x, y and z axis, and then it also takes a color. So let me just show you how that happens. So suppose we say 0x, 0y, and let's say 3 pixels on the z axis, rather 5 pixels to make it more prominent, and then it takes an RGBA of 0. We want to make it really invisible, so 0.5. So that gives it a half opacity. Now you can see this really neat little shadow going all across our content. So that is what box shadow does. It's a neat little trick for when you don't want to use a border or something like that. Now other than borders, there's also outline. Let's say an outline is black in color. So outline completely negates our box shadow, and you could also say outline equals none. So let's remove that now because box shadow looks really neat. Yep. Okay, so now let's talk about text decorations. So since we have some text already going up, let's decorate it. Now there are a few kinds of text decoration that I want to show. So the text decoration, let's say, so first say is line through. Just put a line through all of the content, so now it's all strike through. You'd also say something like overline or underline. So let's see that underline will underline our text. Yep. and overline, as you might have guessed. Well, overline our text. Now everything has a line on top of it. Fine. Now we can also set the visibility of our text or any other tag, to be honest. Visibility. So let's check out all the other visibilities that are there. So to do that, always go on Google and type visibility and CSS, and let's see the visibility property and how it goes. So you must understand that knowing everything in CSS is kind of impossible. So you should always have a go-to or a backup. So my backup is normally W3 School, and they have everything regarding CSS and its properties. These are all the properties that you want to go through, and I'm mostly going through the most important ones in this tutorial that you may use in your day-to-day projects and topics. But sometimes you might need the rare ones like counter reset, empty cells, flex spaces, and all these stuff. And you can always go back to W3 schools and go through them. Now you can say visibility is visible or something like that, and it should make it visible. Yeah, right. So that was all about the miscellaneous types of CSS that we were handling. Now let's go ahead and see some gradients and how we can create some beautiful gradients using CSS. Okay, now before we move on to gradients, let me just show you some white spaces or some more text transformations. Right, so I already showed you all these text transformations. There's capitalize, there's lowercase, there's overline, line through, uppercase, and underline. Now capitalize will just capitalize it, so I don't think I'm going to show that to you guys. Now let's close these two pages out here. Let's create a new CSS file, and first of all let's set this to CSS. Let's save it, and let's say it's going to be page6.css. Now out here, if you see, we have a bunch of white spaces, right? Now let's see how you can handle white spaces using CSS. So there is this thing called the ID called whitespace pre. I think that's exactly what it's called, whitespace pre. Yep. Let's select that, and you could say whitespace is pre. Let's see how that changes stuff. So first of all, let me load up page 6 for you guys. Right. Let's remove the CSS. Save it. Let's reload it again. And what we are actually targeting is this part. Whitespace will be preserved. Right, so white space will be preserved. Now go ahead, uncomment that, save it, and let's reload. Now see, the white spaces that are in the HTML is preserved. Now white spaces can also be handled in other ways. So there are two things that I want to show. So let's select this thing called never wrap, right? And we say that the white space is going to be no wrap. So let's see how that works. So first of all, this is what we are actually targeting, this lorem ipsum part out here, and it's somewhat like this, and let's see how it changes now. And now you see that it goes completely out till here, so no wrap, it doesn't wrap it around. So you also have pre-wrap, so let me just show you how that works. So I'm going to be targeting this part out here with these weird kind of white spacing. So let's see, preserve wrap. So with preserve wrap we go pre-wrap out here, and that's the property. So let's see, yep, lorem ipsum and the wrap has been preserved. Okay, now you can also set up the direction. So let me just show you how that's done. So we're going to select these two things out here, left, right, and right, left. So hash left, right, and also control C, and let's make this right, left. Fine, let's remove all this stuff for now, and let's remove everything before right, left too. Now that we've removed that, let's remove this. Let's save it. Let's see. Okay, so this is what it looks like right now, and all you have to say is direction is L to R, so that means left to right. Now here you say direction is RTL. Let's see how that changes stuff. So I prefer right to left, and I prefer left to right, so that's how it's working. Fine. So that was all about white spacing and directions. Now let's move on to gradients and animations. So this is going to be the last part and the most interesting part in my opinion. So gradients are those beautiful backgrounds you see on most websites, and to generate your gradient you can always use this thing called a gradient generator. So this gradient generator out here is a really nice gradient generator. You have to select the direction and you select the ending colors. So I've already selected a gradient out here. It's going to create this gradient. Now let's see. Go to page 7. Right. Now let's select the body tag. Let's close this off. Let's close this off. I want to save this. And let's create a new page first of all. And this is going to be our CSS. So we have to save it and say page 7. Right. Now we select our body and just paste in. So let me just explain how this happens. So there's a linear gradient and there's also another thing called radial gradient. So I'll just show you that. Now this takes in a few parameters. The first is to the right, that's the direction, and this is how the colors will change. So let's just see how that works. So first of all, let me comment this out. Let me just open page 7 for you. Now if you see, it's going to be a blank page. Okay, this is the gradient. I'm sorry. Let me save that. Right, so this is what it looks without a gradient, and you already saw what it looks with a gradient, but let me just show it to you again. This is what it looks with a gradient. Now you can also set the background with other stuff like image. So for that you go URL and you can paste in the URL. So let's go and search for a beautiful image. I really like Dragon Ball Z, so Goku Super Saiyan 3. So that should be a good image to save as a background. So let's see, this looks like a really nice image. So you go here. Let me just save this image as. So this is going to be Goku, and it's going to be saved in desktop and CSS tutorial. It's going to be goku.jpeg. Right, so you could say goku.jpeg. Right, now that's saved, let's go back to our page and it should have a picture of Goku. Okay, so that didn't work. I think I got something wrong. Let's go and analyze that. So open up our CSS tutorial. Okay, so it's a JPG file and not JPEG, so that was our mistake. Small mistake, nonetheless. And now we have this picture of Goku. Now you can also set the background repeat. Let's close this off. Say background repeat, and you could say no repeat, and it will not repeat the background anymore. Or you could say background repeat is gonna be. Let's check out all the background repeats that are actually available. Now background and repeat. So if you go into background repeat and see the properties, you can just try it yourself. So you can repeat it according to the y-axis, you can repeat it according to the x-axis. So let's see how that works. So repeat x. So if we say that, I think it should repeat it on the x-axis like it was, or you could repeat it on the y-axis. I don't think that'll show up out here, but let's see. Yep, it's now repeating on the y-axis. So that's how background repeat also works. So we've covered that too. Now we've also covered the gradients. Now it's time we do some radial gradient. Now if you remember, let me just go back to the gradient part. So if you have a radial gradient, all you have to say is that it's a radial gradient out here. And a radial gradient doesn't really need direction because it's going to be radial. Save it. Page, and let's reload it. Okay, now we have a radial gradient. Now you see all these lines going in, but if I just zoom out, you can see that it starts from the center and it spreads out, where it's white on the sides and white on the sides. So that's how radial gradients work. Okay, so now that we've covered the gradients, let's go into animation. So I think animation is the most interesting thing that you can do with CSS. So we have selected the div. So first of all, let's give the div a border. So this border is going to be 2 pixels, solid and black. Now let's give it a background to begin with. Let's say it's going to be of red. Now this is how you do animations in CSS. Okay, so before animations actually, let me show you how you can move this thing around. Fine, so there's some stuff that I want to show you guys. So let this be. Let me just show you what this looks like. So let me give this a width. First, it's going to be 100 pixels, or rather 200 pixels, and the height will also be 200 pixels. Now let's see. Okay, we have this div out here. Let's make it a little bigger. Give it 500 and 500. Save it. Yep. Let's also make this much more prominent. Let's give it a 10 pixel background. I mean a 10 pixel border. And now you see we have a really prominent square out there. Now let's try some really interesting stuff. So let's say div, and when we hover over the div, you want to scale this. So scale, and let's say we want to scale. Okay, so that's not how you scale. First you say transform, and how do you want to transform? You want to scale it, and you want to scale it twice. So when we hover over it, it should scale twice. Let's reload, and as you see, it's scaling twice. Now we can also transform some other stuff like this. So we can rotate. So we can say rotate 45 degrees. Let's see. When I hover, it's rotating 45 degrees. You can also skew it. So skewing is how it works. Let's see. You can skew it 20 degrees to the x-axis and 10 degrees to the y-axis. Save it, and this is how it gets skewed. This is how skewing works. You can also translate stuff. So let me show you how translation works. So translate, and let's see, you want to translate at 20 pixels and 20 pixels. So let's see. Hover over it and it translates a little. Let's translate it around 120 pixels just to make it more clear. 120 and 120. Let's save that. Let's reload this, and you see that now it's translating so much, right? So that's how translate works. Okay, now that I've showed you scale, rotation, skewing, and translate, let's see, we can also set up the transitions. So with transitions you can set up a lot of stuff. So now that we're done with transitions, let's go ahead and see some animation. So for animation, I'm going to be actually targeting this div out here. So let's actually style this div. I've given it the width of 100 pixels and a height of 100 pixels, and a background of red, and a border of 3 pixels, solid, and black, let's say, right? Let's see what that looks like. Now that's what it looks like. Fine. Let's zoom in a bit. Now all we need to do is actually set up some keyframes. So we do that by saying keyframes. Now we name our keyframes. Let's call it anime, and we have to set up actually what it will look like at different points in time. So we do that by saying 0%, and it'll have, let's say, a background color of red, and then it'll move. So we want to move it in the square. So let's say it'll be not padding, rather it'll be 0 pixels from the left, and from the top it's going to be 0 pixels. Let's save that, copy that down. Let's paste that a bunch of times. Now what I want to say is this is going to be 25, it's going to be 50, it's going to be 75, and this is going to be 100. Let's save that. Let's change their colors. So this is going to be yellow first, then it changes to green, some pretty basic colors, blue then, and in the end we'll change it to red. So that brings us back to the original position. Let's first also move it by 300 pixels, then let's move it 300 pixels both ways. Now it's only going to move 300 pixels this way, and in the end it comes back to the original position. Now to use this keyframes animation, we have to give this animation name. It's going to be using the animation with the keyframes name anime. Now we can say the animation delay is going to be 2 seconds. You can also say how many times it's going to be iterating. So you can say that by 100. Let's save that. Okay, so our animation is not working because we haven't set the positioning. So now let us just save this, and let's say our position is going to be relative. Let's save that. Let's uncomment our animation. Now you see that our animation will work as we intended it to. So after 2 seconds our animation starts working, and this will just keep going on and on. Now if you want to actually repeat that animation, there's a way you can do that, and that is with the animation iteration count. Let's say you want to iterate it 100 times. Let's reload. Let's wait for 2 seconds, and voila, our animation will keep going on and on and on. So that's how you animate stuff with CSS, guys. And that brings us to the end of this tutorial. I hope you all enjoyed everything I taught you all today. If you all have any doubts regarding any CSS or any properties that you want to know about, you can always refer to W3 Schools, or you can leave us a comment in the comment section down below. Until next time, goodbye.
I hope you have enjoyed listening to this video. Please be kind enough to like it, and you can comment any of your doubts and queries, and we will reply them at the earliest. Do look out for more videos in our playlist and subscribe to Edureka channel to learn more. Happy learning!